Welcome to Prospecting Part 1, Finding Wealth in Your Community. This webinar will provide an overview of prospect research, including database tips and tricks and free online resources and how to access them. It will touch on prospect research ethics and the need for confidentiality with prospect research information. And the objectives of this webinar are to increase the understanding of prospect research, increase the understanding of the available online resources we have in prospect research and how to use them, and increase the understanding of how to take this data and use it for a prospect identification action plan. So what is prospect research? Prospect research uses publicly available information about your donors and prospects, both biographical, financial, and philanthropic information, to help you be more strategic and donor-centered when it comes to your prospects, both current and new prospects. Basically, it's used to identify donors who have the capacity and inclination to make a major or planned gift. Prospect research information, along with information gained through the cultivation prospect of face-to-face visits, allows an organization to implement more strategic solicitation plans for their prospects. There's some guiding principles to consider when looking for a good prospect, and I call them the ABCs of good prospecting. The first one is ability. Does my prospect have the ability to make a financial contribution to my organization? What is their financial capacity? Belief or affinity. Do they have a belief in what I do? Is there an inclination or interest in the organization's mission? And then contact or access. Do I have the ability to get in front of my prospect to talk about my mission and build a relationship? A lot of times we have prospects with the ability and even the belief in our organization, but we don't have access to them. And if we don't have access to them, we can't get in front of them to build that relationship. So they remain a suspect until we can find an access point and start to build those relationships. I'd like to talk a little bit about our inner prospect researcher. I believe everyone has an inner prospect researcher. We've all used online resources to find information, whether it's about a long-lost school friend, how much our neighbors spent on their house, whatever it might be. We've used online resources to look up this sort of information. And when I've asked this question in the past, people have said, yes, I've looked on the internet for my long-lost friends. So if we were to find Sally, a long-lost school friend, and play a game called Where's Sally, we might find that in trying to find Sally that a lot of us use common online resources such as Google or LinkedIn, Facebook, classmates, white pages. We may ask a mutual friend or even Sally's parent if they can put us back in contact with Sally. And by doing so, we're doing the same things that a professional researcher would do in looking for information on a prospect. We use online resources to find information about Sally. And then we engage our key volunteers and staff members to find out, do you have a way to help us connect with Sally? So using those types of things in our personal life to find Sally are the same things that we use in our nonprofit world to find information about our prospects. It's about volunteer engagement, accessibility, and those online resources that help us find additional information. And by using that information, it can help us do some pretty amazing things. And the benefits of prospect research include uncovering those hidden donors. We didn't know, John Smith was in our database and owned the company next door. We learned that information through prospect research. It helps us increase our gifts from existing donors. If we get the same amount from Joe, who sponsors a golf hole at our local golf event every year, but down the street we find out he's giving $10,000 to a local charity that does something similar to ours, then there's an opportunity through relationship building to maybe increase that gift. Prospect research helps us segment our donors into likelihood and giving capacity so that we can prioritize our work. Who has the most potential and the closest relationship to us that we should be focused on first? It also helps us identify future potential board members and organizational champions, people who have a closer affinity to our organization. And through learning all this information, it helps us to develop better approach and engagement strategies for cultivation and solicitation. So some things we're going to do in this webinar are look at your database, the geographic area of your organization, as well as your organization's circle of influence. All of these things are important when trying to build a prospect research program and get to know your donors better. So what's inside your database? I've been here about 2 years, and one of the things I found out when I came to the movement is that our organizations use about 31 different types of databases across the movement, according to our annual report. But one thing that all these databases have in common is that there are some basic canned reports that can tell you some important information about your prospects. They can help tell you more information about the size of your gift, who are my new donors, who are my top donors. There are some canned reports for that information. So if you were going to start looking at your database a little bit closer, some things to consider are starting with information you already know about your existing donors and analyzing those records, looking at gift size, cumulative giving, years of giving, even number of gifts. And what we're trying to do by doing that is identify our loyal donors. Do we track our club alumni? Who are our major donors, even if they've lapsed? Who are those people who have given a gift before at a large amount that we'd want to re-engage? What about our event attendees? Are we tracking that information? A lot of times those are people that we don't tap into, but they've just seen our mission in action through our Youth of the Year event, and they're feeling the mission, and that's a good time to start to work closer with those people. Are we already tracking Gift Society members for annual, major, or planned gifts? Do we track volunteer and mentor information? A lot of times our volunteers become really great planned giving prospects in the future. So some things you can look at in your database are giving patterns. These are some typical ways to look at annual major gift and planned gift donors, but sometimes they're a little different in your database. So to review an annual donor, if you look at RFM, which is the recency, frequency, and monetary value or cumulative giving of your donor database, a lot of times your annual donors are your more recent donors, and they can sometimes be upgraded to higher annual gifts or become your major and planned gift pipeline. They're loyal donors, and they consider themselves loyal donors, and the industry considers them loyal donors if they've given at least 3 out of the last 5 years. And the reason for that is that when we set our fiscal year, it's not based on what our donor considers, a year in which they've given. It's a false year based on our own financial statistics and our financial reporting. But your donor may give in November, but your fiscal year starts in December. And so they'll fall out of your current year's donations if you're just looking at your fiscal year. So what the industry recommends is looking at the 3 out of the last 5 years for loyalty for annual giving. And they tend to give through different channels. They give through mail, online, over the phone, in person. They tend to be your year-end stock donors. They can be younger, and volunteerism is really important to the younger generation, getting involved and seeing what the organization is doing. For major gift donors, they give larger gifts less frequently. They have larger cumulative giving, and they may have already given a 5 to 7 figure gift outside your organization, and they serve on your community boards. A lot of times we tell ourselves stories that if they've given to the local university at a large level, they'll never give to us. But a lot of times what the statistics say is that someone who's given $100,000 or more to another organization are at least 10 times as likely to give to another organization. So make sure we're not selling ourselves short when we're looking at major gift potential, even if the larger gift has already gone to another organization. Unless their giving is specifically to something like neonatal care and we don't do anything around that, there's always the opportunity to translate what somebody's giving in one organization to some of the things that we do in our organization. For instance, if you were to look at a university, they focus on healthy lifestyle, STEM, those types of things, as do we. So there is a correlation and a common interest that can be translated between organizations and when you look at donor interests. Major gift donors look at their donations as investments. They want to see the impact in the ROI. So it's really important when somebody gives a major gift to report back the impact of what their dollars are doing for the organization and for our kids. They also give through multiple channels, meaning they give personally, they give through donor advised funds, family foundations, businesses. So if you have people that look like this in your database that haven't given a major gift, it's a good group to look at closer because this is telling you something about their asset structure. They're diversifying their asset structure by having donor advised funds, family foundations, businesses, as well as personal gifts that come from them. And then planned gift donors, they tend to give more frequently, but they give smaller amounts, even monthly. A lot of times your monthly donors are your planned gift potential donors. But it's also important to note that they lapse around the time of retirement. Sometimes we tell ourselves stories that the person doesn't care about us anymore, and that's not true. When people are at the time of retirement, they start to assess their household and what's going out of the household. So they may lapse around that time, but you may notice that they become volunteers to your organization right around that time as well. They tend to be older, 60 or older. Neither have no children in their household at the moment. They're empty nesters, or they're just have never had children. They can be single or widowed. They have appreciated property, real estate stock. And again, they tend to downsize around the time of retirement. So sometimes if you were to do a wealth screening on them, they may not rate as high because they're going from the large family home down to a condo, something more manageable. And these are some interesting tips and tricks that you can do within your own database. And these are things I've done in my past when I haven't had a large research budget. So I've had to get creative. Something that we all have in our database that our data can tell us is we have zip codes, and we can look for wealthy zip codes in our area. There's some websites dedicated to that, and there's a guide called Do It Yourself Research on the bgca.net that's available for anyone to download for our clubs. And it has all these tips and tricks in here, but these are some that you can look at. If you didn't want to go to a website for wealthy zip codes, you could simply type in wealthy zip codes plus the name of your city and state, and you usually can find a list of them. Another great trick is to look at email addresses. A lot of us are capturing email addresses nowadays. And what's most interesting is what's after the @ sign. So we're not interested in Gmail or Yahoo. We're interested in at Disney.com or at Lowe's or Home Depot. What's after that @ sign? A lot of times you can find very valuable information without having to pay for expensive research tools because after the @ sign is really important. I used this trick when I was at the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and our giving used to go up 40% during the holidays. So right after the holidays, I'd pull all the email addresses and look at what's after the @ sign, and we were able to identify a CFO of a large retail box store that had given his first gift to our organization. And because we had seen that and done the after the @ sign tips and tricks tool, we were able to have our CEO reach out and do a special thank you. The person was in a local chapter area, and we made the introduction because he wanted to get involved at the local level, and he's now serving on the board for that organization. So there's lots of cool things you can find when you use that trick. Another great one is employers and job title. If we're tracking career information, even if it's old, it's valuable. When I was at the University of South Florida, we had a lot of old career information that was from a database conversion. And we started combing through that information. And we had this woman, and I can talk about her because she's on our website for famous alumni. Her name was Ann Turner Cook. And her employee information said Nestle. And so, as a researcher, we're thinking, oh, maybe she, is a vice president or, works higher up in the organization. But all we had was these two pieces of information. And when we researched her, and we just did a simple Google search of her name and Nestle. And what we found out is she was the Gerber baby, the original Gerber baby. And she had gone to the University of South Florida and got her degree in education. None of us knew this. She wound up becoming a famous mystery writer and an English teacher, but she got her start in her education at the University of South Florida. And so what this tells me, and what this should tell you, is even if you have older information in your database, it's valuable because that person either still works for that company or their career information through LinkedIn or their company bio will have them linked to that older piece of information that helps you find what they're doing now. If you have foundations in your database, you can look up foundation information and see if any of the family members or officers on that foundation are also giving to your organization. It helps to provide a bigger picture of the relationship to your organization. Gifts of stock. Do you have gifts of stock in your database? Are you tracking the name of the stock or just simply that it's stock? You can type in the person's name plus SEC for the Stock Exchange Commission and see if that person pops up. Or you can type in the name plus the name of the stock. So if it's, John Smith, Bank of America, and they're a public insider where they're required to report their information, you'll be able to find that information pretty quickly. So it can tell you more about your donor. And then gift in kinds, if you're tracking the description either in your database or an event worksheet, look for trips and luxury items, golf privileges, timeshares, boats, those types of things. If people are donating that type of stuff to an auction, that's telling you something about their lifestyle and their ability to give a gift because they have those types of things that point to the characteristics of high net worth individuals. Now let's talk a little bit about finding wealth in your neighborhood. These are some tips and tricks for finding more donors to give to your organization and also finding out more about existing donors. So how do I find my neighbors? What types of database resources can I use? I talked a little bit about wealthy zip codes. We also have real estate assessor sites. So if you typed in the name of your county and state plus property appraiser or property assessor. A lot of times these sites will let you look up an owner name or street address, and I'll show you a screen print of that in the coming slides. You can look up company information through state and corporation sites. You can type in the name of your state plus state and corporation and go to one of those sites to see, I get this check from, the ABC company and I don't know much about it. You can look in your state and corporation site and see, who are the officers on that company? Am I already tied to some of those officers? I want to know more. If you're trying to find the top businesses in your area, you can always type in top or largest companies plus your city and state. If you're looking for information on community boards for your Chamber of Commerce, Visitors Board, Community Foundation, even universities and colleges, you can type in the name of your city and state plus Chamber of Commerce plus board. Do a variety of different searches to find those boards and see who's on them. Am I already engaged with these people, or are there people on my board that are tied to these board members that might be good future board members? So it's a good place to look for that type of information. And then insider information for stock. A great site is MarketWatch. So if you did MarketWatch plus insider, and you knew somebody owned stock, you could always look them up to see how much stock they had. Or if you knew you had a publicly traded company in your community, you could look up that company on MarketWatch and then look at the insiders that are on that company to find out more information about them and see if those people are already tied to your organization or linked to one of your volunteers. Again, highest paid executives, you can do highest paid executives plus your city. Or you can look in the Business Journal Book of Lists, probably the only resource I would recommend spending some money on. The Book of Lists, you can buy an electronic downloadable version and they'll give you stuff like most charitable corporations in your community, highest paid executives, and things like that. So this is an example of a state and corporation site. This is the Mississippi State one. So if you typed in Mississippi plus state and corporation, you would get this. And you can look up the name of the company, you can look up an officer's name, and some of these will give you the original incorporation paperwork. Arizona and Florida are two that actually give you documents that you can download for free and look at original incorporation paperwork to see who started the company. Some of these sites require you to pay, so you can only get so far. You can see the preliminary report of the person and maybe the names of the officers, but you can't get any further than that without paying. But it's a good starting point. For looking at property appraisal, this one's from Montgomery County, Alabama. So I typed in the county plus the state plus property appraiser, and that's how we got here. And this particular site allows you to look up owner information, address information. You can even search a neighborhood. I use this when I lived in Florida. We had somebody that lived in the wealthiest home, highest priced home in Tampa Bay, who gave to our university, and we wanted to know, does anyone else live in his neighborhood that we also want to get to know, or who's already giving to us? And so we searched that whole neighborhood, and we found out about 40% of that neighborhood was already in our database and giving to our organization. So it told us that we needed to have some kind of dinner party there and really get to know the neighbors better, since the person with the highest value home was already deeply engaged with the organization. This is an example of a Chamber of Commerce site. So if you typed in your city and state and Chamber of Commerce, you can look at a membership directory. A lot of chambers will give you a printed version or electronic version of their membership list. You can look up the board members, who's involved. If you're looking for future board members, particularly maybe it's, I need somebody, a financial person on my board, you can look up the financial companies within your member directory and then go over them with your board or key volunteers to see, of these companies, do we know anybody that would be a great candidate for a future board member. This is an example of a MarketWatch Insider. So in this case, this is Bill Gates, and if you typed in Bill Gates, this is the type of information you would get. In this case, he's got stock in a number of companies, but it tells you the full amount of his stock, when the last time he sold some of his stock was. So this is important. I worked in an organization where the donor had told my fundraiser, I'll give you the 7-figure gift when my stock reaches a certain amount. And so on MarketWatch Insider, you can actually set up stock alerts. And I did that so that I could track the stock price for my fundraiser. And when it used to go up, I used to let the fundraiser know, even though it hadn't reached the top amount yet. I thought, you might want to check in on Mr. Smith and see how he's doing, let him know you're thinking about him, those sorts of things. And eventually he did make his 7-figure gift when his stock got to the price that he was waiting for. And this is just an example of finding highest paid executives. This was just a search of highest paid executives in a state. And this is a Business Journal excerpt. So even if you don't have a subscription to Business Journal, a lot of times you can get the highlights through a news article without having to have the subscription, and you can find a list of people and their salaries really quickly. This is a list you could cross-reference with your database very quickly and see if any of those people are already engaged and at what level. And then another thing I get asked a lot is how do I find out what my donors are giving? So how generous are my neighbors? So looking up philanthropy, you can look up foundation information. GuideStar and Foundation Center both have limited free access accounts. So if you wanted to set up an account to be able to look up 990s, who are the officers in a foundation, do a more advanced search about foundations with an interest in youth development, GuideStar definitely has those types of options within their free account. But both are available, and the Do-It-Yourself Prospect Research Guide has some tips and tricks on how to search within those two websites. Political information is a great thing to look at. There are several sites, Follow the Money, the FEC.gov. Open Secrets is a good one for if you're doing an election year. Sometimes these get really slow, so Open Secrets tends to be the one that's the fastest during that time. Again, these are in your Do-It-Yourself Prospect Research Guide on bgca.net. But the reason political information is important to look at is a lot of times there have been studies from the Chronicle of Philanthropy that show that there's a correlation between political giving and charitable giving. What the studies have shown is those people who give politically are looking to impact their community through their political dollars, and those same people are looking to impact their community through their charitable dollars. And so that impact becomes really important. The other reason that political giving is important to look at is it tells you something about somebody's discretionary income. If they have a certain level of discretionary income that they're giving to a political cause, they have that same money that they can give to a charitable cause. There's been one study that showed that people who gave $2,500 or more to a political cause were 14 times more likely to give philanthropically, and people who gave $500 politically were at least 5 times as more likely to give philanthropically. And then just overall charitable giving is probably the hardest thing to find because we don't always publish our annual reports online, or people are anonymous when they give. There's a number of reasons why, but these are some tips and tricks for how to find that information. You put your donor's name, plus donation, plus the city and state. If you know they're giving to a specific organization, you could put their name plus that organization, plus annual report. If you have a competing organization such as the YMCA, you can put in YMCA plus your city plus annual report and look at that annual report and see who's giving. Do I have those donors in my database? What are they giving to me versus what are they giving to the other charity? Another thing is, if you know that your prospect serves on a board or formerly served on a board, you could look at the annual reports or donor lists from those organizations and see, what was my prospect giving there, to give you a better idea of the types of gifts and sizes that they've been giving to other organizations. And these are just some search examples of how to look at that information and what type of information you get. So if you were to go to this opensecrets.org, which is a political donations website, you can see that you can look up information about a specific donor or a geographic area, even occupation. And the results you get back, you get the name, you get the occupation of that person, the dollar range that they're giving, and the political party that they're giving to. What I like about this is you actually get the occupation, so you can find out more about what your prospect may be doing if you didn't already know where they worked. And again, this is guidestar.org. If you went in here, you could set up your own account for free and then start to do some more advanced searches. Now, something that's really important to discuss is prospect research ethics. There's a professional organization called APRA, which is the Association of Professional Researchers for Advancement, and they have a code of ethics that all researchers are bound to, and it's really important to think about because the information that we're finding on our donors is confidential information. It's public, but once you put it into a report, it's considered confidential. And so it's important that we are good stewards of our donors' information the way we are of their dollars. And so for the APRA Code of Ethics, we're held to some guiding principles of integrity, accountability, practice, and conflict of interest. We're making sure that we're doing research for the right reasons, and that we're using the information in the correct way, we're accurate in what we do. We're held accountable not only to our organization for the information we find, but also to our donors, making sure that we're being discreet and professional about the type of information we find and how we share it. And then for conflict of interest, we're making sure we're not using this information for purposes outside of our organization. So a lot of times I get asked, can you find me a rich husband or wife? And the answer is, yeah, I could do that, but I'm not going to because it's against my APRA Code of Ethics. There are local APRA chapters across the country. If you were to go to aprahome.org, you can find a link to look for your local APRA organization. These are great organizations. It's not just for researchers, it's also for fundraisers. I've met a lot of different fundraisers when I've been involved with APRA locally, and they have great resources. They get together sometimes monthly. I know they get together yearly to have a conference. It's usually low cost, under $50. And they'll have guest speakers come in. They're usually speakers from the industry, from different consulting firms, different vendors, and they give you a lot of tips and tricks on how to do research in better ways. So it's a great organization to be involved with. And then some things I like to do is just to make sure people are paying attention is kind of talk about what can research find and not find. So from a true-false quiz, true or false research, can you find a research value? And the answer is true. You can find research value through your property appraiser site. Foundation assets, that's true. Through the 990, you can see somebody's assets. Bank account balance. You cannot find somebody's bank account balance. That is private information. The only people who can find that are hackers, and prospect researchers are definitely not hackers. Company holdings or compensation for a public company. You can find that information if they're an insider and their information is reportable. They own at least 10% of the company, or their officers or directors within that public company, then their information is reportable. Compensation or company holdings for stock holdings for a private company executive are hard to find, and so it's false. You can't usually find that information because it's not reportable. Private companies are not required to report that information. Phone numbers, it's sometimes true, sometimes false. You can find phone numbers, but cell numbers aren't always easy to find, and they're not always public. And then finally, a person's true net worth is false. Because we can't see somebody's liabilities, you can't see somebody's true net worth. The closest you can get is if it's a Forbes billionaire or millionaire on the Forbes list and they're reporting a net worth. That's usually pretty accurate. But for the most part, for the average person, you can't see their true net worth because you can't see their debt. And then what do we do with all this information once we have it? How do we meet our neighbors? So one of the things that you can do is assess what you know through a prospect assessment worksheet, and these are also available on bgca.net. So by using the prospect assessment worksheet, what you're trying to do is figure out, what do I already know about my prospect? What do I need to know? And what am I trying to achieve by knowing this information? Maybe I discover through my prospect assessment that I really don't know what, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith's philanthropic interests are. I know they're wealthy, I know where they live, I know how much they give to the organization, I even have connections to them, but I don't really know truly what their philanthropic priorities are. Or you may find that, I know what their interests are, but I don't really know what their value is. I don't know what their financial ability is. By doing an assessment, it kind of points you to what do I need to know in order to move forward? And will this help me move forward? So some next steps that I would recommend would be to check your database for wealth and use some of the tips and tricks that were discussed in this webinar to identify 1 to 3 top prospects, and use the prospect assessment worksheet to kind of figure out, what do I already know about my prospect and what do I need to know? Then I would also utilize some of the research techniques discussed today to find 2 to 3 prospects that aren't in my database but are in my community. And then I would ask key staff and board members and volunteers to review the combined list for feedback. And based on that feedback, I would update the prospect assessment worksheet and then assign next steps to make contact with these prospects. This is a good way to take the information and just start to work with it and identify a few prospects that stand out to you and find out more information. Because the more you know, the more you're able to move forward with next steps to make contacts, especially if you're identifying, how to access them. You're looking for those things that we talked about in our guiding principles. The financial ability of my prospects to give a gift, the belief in my mission, is there an affinity to what we do, and then can we access them? And by doing exercises like this and doing a prospect assessment and asking key volunteer and staff to help you, then you can kind of figure that out and move forward. The next session that we'll be doing on prospecting will be on July 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it'll be about rating techniques and peer review sessions. So how to build a prospect list, how to rate them, and some peer review techniques for asking key volunteers for more information about your prospects to move forward. Additional online resources are on the Fundraising Bank and also on bgca.net. There's the Do-It-Yourself Research Guide, prospecting rating grid, which we'll go over in session 2 on July 15th. The prospect assessment worksheets out there. There's some guidelines for handling confidential information, how to assess prospect readiness, and even the peer review sessions best practices is already out there on .net. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.